time for episode 58 of Commentator's Corner, and I've got a very good friend who I first met through my travels in the Downforce radio side of things. And welcome along, Tom Cairns. Tom, good to see you, buddy. It's been a while since PFI last year when you and Mr. Ryan Ferris were on camera duties for the final round of the Euro Trophy at PFI. How are things, mate?
Things have been okay, Alex. Thank you very much. Been trying to keep myself busy, trying to get a schedule filled at the moment, which is never the easiest thing to do when it's during the winter months, really. I think typically during the winter months it tends to be rather sort of dreary, gloomy sort of period anyway. But when the sort of spring starts to come around, then spirits start to sort of raise a little bit more, and you see a few more opportunities around the corner. But yeah, it feels somewhat quiet because last month I got made redundant for one of my regular jobs, not the one I was doing at Formula One, but over at Warner Brothers Discovery.
Mm,
For those wondering what I was doing, um, my role was officially a media logger role, but it was more to do with the segmentation side of things. So basically, what my role was is during the overnight shifts, I was made to basically segment the TNT sports content. So whether that be football or NBA or WWE or cricket that's
mm.
going on in either like Australia or New Zealand, um, basically from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m., I was made to basically segment the program so it doesn't include like adverts or off-air sort of bits, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It was a relatively simple job, but I felt like skills wise I wasn't really developing enough, nowhere near it. I think out of like a 12-hour shift, considering the amount of time or how long it would take overall to do all the segmentation stuff over the course of one evening, averaging at most an hour
Hmm.
out of 12 hours, which is not really great when you're doing an overnight shift, really. So, on one side of it, of me, I'm glad to be out of it, but on the other side of it is money, and that's obviously lost because I've lost the job. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, that's it's a tough pill to take, but you just got to remain positive, and hopefully something else that'll come around as it will.
Yeah, of course. At the point of recording this, launch season very much underway with the 2024 FIA Formula One World Championship. You are a logger and researcher at Formula One. Now, when we first crossed paths, one of the previous roles that Tom actually had was former racing history editor at Downforce Radio, which meant you were looking through all the old, the old sort of historic moments. When it comes to your role as being a logger and a researcher at Formula One, what's the most interesting thing or things about your job working with, the most recognised single seater championship across the globe?
I mean, one of the most exciting things really is like you learn the environment of working within such a huge media office. I mean, it may look like a big box in itself, but it's such a huge organisation in terms of the gallery area that's been put in place, which was a new gallery which was put in at the beginning of last year, actually. I mean, when I first started, the whole sort of gallery sort of section of the building was like in a huge box. So, but now it's like a proper gallery as you walk in. There's like a foyer area which people, like visitors, can walk through and just transparently see the people working behind the scenes with like all the screens and all the sort of different cameras around all the sort of bits and pieces you would expect to see within a media production building, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
Um, so a lot has changed, and it feels like every time I walk into the building, there's always something new that's been built there, and that's one of the most exciting things about working within Formula One, especially within Biggin Hill. And also meeting some of the people there, as you'd imagine. I obviously have had the opportunity to meet Alex Jakes a number of times now as well. Quite frankly, one of the most wonderful people you'll ever meet. He would always give up the time when he has the chance to do so. I even remember speaking to him about my commentary stuff that I do in my spare time at the back end of last year. And when I bumped into him in the foyer when he was off air, I basically called him over just to see if he had like 2 minutes to chat. And he just simply said, "Come over to this desk, put his arm like there, and talk to me what you want to say about what you do." And that tells you something about what he's like as a person, because pretty much everyone else would just simply stand there without doing the sort of arm bit on the desk thing. So the personality side of Alex is absolutely wonderful. and he would also provide any quality feedback when he's got the chance to do so. I had to remind him because obviously he had a busy time of it with races like in Las Vegas and Abu Dhabi and all that. But he provided quality feedback on my commentary stuff, and the two things which I really picked up on when he gave that back to me was identity and style. It says that my commentary is really strong, which is great, but the identity and style thing does need work if you want to get to where you really want to be.
Mm.
And I perfectly agreed with him because there is a mixture of sort of me, sort of conversational, sometimes a little bit of Ben Edwards type commentary. If there's something exciting happening on the circuit, that type of thing.
Yeah.
I do have that part of me, but I think it's always nice to have a bit of a mixture within me. But I am open to sort of someone coaching me, if that makes sense, when they've got the time to do so.
Yeah.
So maybe it's something that can help me progress in my career as like a broadcaster or a commentator or a presenter, really. And I think the next steps, considering that I've been doing the league racing commentary side of things for PSGL, the FRL, and of course Downforce, being commentator for the Grand Prix World Series this season, which we are close to the season's end at the time of recording. So perhaps when this goes out, the season will probably already finished.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you haven't seen it, for those who haven't seen the Grand Prix World Series and Downforce Radio, I do recommend giving it a watch because it's something different. And basically, what it is, it's a championship that involves drivers and teams that have never won in Formula One. It can't be current race drivers and it can't be race winners. So you could have people like Scott Dixon, for instance, who's tested a Formula One car. You could have Antonio Felix da Costa, who has been involved in a test in either a Toro Rosso or a Red Bull, because he was amongst their Red Bull junior ranks during his days in GP3. But yeah, it's brilliant. It's fascinating to watch, really. So yeah, going back to your question again about the most exciting thing about working at Formula One is working with those who work with the recognisable faces within the Formula One paddock. I mean, I could give so many names out there, which I don't think too many people have heard of them, but you do see them if you are working there. You do see them working a lot if you're working within the digital media department. Um, but yeah, that's one of the qualities really about working within such an incredible organisation that has been going on for well over 7 decades, really.
It's quite interesting when you put it in that vernacular, Tom. When Formula One has been going around, the first ever race, of course, Silverstone, 1950 Silverstone. I'm so happy to hear that they've got a 10-year extension on their contract, which was something you posted on Twitter or X or whatever anyone wants to call it these days. I still call it Twitter, even though I put in the description it's sort of like X, formerly Twitter, and it still has the Twitter URL, which is always quite funny. I mean, let's come on to launch season because at the point of recording, we've seen the majority of the cars. There have been some leaked videos and images of the RB20, which pretty much sees that Red Bull's going to stick with the same tried and tested livery that we've seen that hasn't really changed that much since 2005. But what has been the most interesting livery, or what's the one that's really caught your eye? Because we have had the SF24 from Scuderia Ferrari now being released. We've also had the W15 from Mercedes AMG Petronas. And quite a few others. I think even VCARB, which is now the acronym for Visa Cash RB, what was it? Visa Cash App RB, which is
Racing
what?
Bulls, I think.
Yeah, which which Red Bull actually trademarked as well, but still decided everyone. So they've called the car the VCARB 01. Which I think is actually quite funny because they've decided, well, we're not going to call it the Visa Cash App, that like make it the longest and most weird sounding team name, but also the longest and weirdest sounding car name. Which one of the out of the liveries so far has really sort of piqued your interest?
Well, two of which that everyone's got their eyes on really is the one from Stake and the one you've just mentioned, the VCARB, because they're totally different from where they were last year.
Hmm.
People got used to seeing the AlphaTauri a lot, and most particularly the Toro Rosso. And I think that's what people are regarding is the Toro Rosso 2019, the livery of the VCARB 01. In terms of the Stake one with the green and black sort of livery, um, it does look different. It's kind of like one of those you see on a podium pass on the F1 game cycle that someone's just stuck on there. But but I do like it. It will take a while to really get used to it. I think when people see new liveries, it feels like a step into the unknown. But when they see them out on circuit regularly enough, whether it be in testing or at the Grand Prix, you do get used to seeing that week in, week out. Considering the number of races we've got throughout the course of 2024. But yeah, if there's one that really sticks out the most to me, it'll probably be the V car because I do love the livery of it.
Yeah, I think it's been quite an interesting discussion that has been populating social media where there's been a lot of cars that have come out with a lot of carbon being exposed. I mean, Stake being one of them, but the Kermit style high vis green has really sort of made a bit of a distinctive impact. And seeing pictures of the Stake F1 team launch, I really thought, well, this is something different. This is something nice. I like what Williams have done with the FW46, that they've gone to the heritage blue, and they've done a bit of a hark back to the 1990s with the white and the red pinstripes that they used to use back in the 1990s. Ferrari, I like that there have been some little tweaks, and also the centre covers of the wheels have also been put in the Scuderia Ferrari red with the yellow accent on it, with the white in there as well. So there's something different. McLaren, yeah, just a different uptake on what we've seen for the last few seasons anyway. But yeah, I think I also like the fact with the W15 that they have gone a little bit sort of making a conglomeration of what we've seen in previous years past when we had the all black silver arrows through the time when Lewis was championing, Black Lives Matters and obviously equality within Formula One, and also diversity. But then to have a little bit of, I would say, I wouldn't say a hodgepodge. It's been a very, very well executed livery that the nose of the car is predominantly silver, harking back to the legend of the silver arrows within Mercedes, but to still have the red of Ineos, which is still a big partner of them anyway, and then to have the Petronas green and then the black around the majority of the car, I think is quite slick. I was hoping there was going to be a little bit more silver on the car, to be honest with you. But I think, yeah, like you say, the V Carbo 1 and the Stake have been the two biggest standouts. But I do like the Merc. I do like the hark back to days of old with Williams, which up until Claire leaving Formula One and then handing it over to Doralton Capital, longest ever garage Easter in Formula One history. But yeah, I'm really interested to see what else, what we could see at Bahrain, what upgrades we're going to see in Bahrain. But also, this ties in well with your role at Biggin Hill. That there are are there times when you're not just working at Biggin Hill, but depending on race weekends, sometimes you could find yourself working on site. Is that correct?
Unfortunately, within my role as a contractor within the digital media department, I don't get the option to go. Unfortunately,
Right.
which is a huge shame. Which it'd been fantastic if it went, but unfortunately, it's not my decision on whether I go or not. That's down to Formula One. But I'm sure there'll be a time, in a number of years, hopefully not too long, that I do get the opportunity to go, depending on what role it'll actually be. In terms of my role as a logger and researcher, so just pardon me for one moment.
No problem.
Yeah, I basically am involved in the spreadsheet because I take my own laptop to the office anyway. So I'm not required to be at the circuit to do my role anyway, hence why I don't get the option to go. And I'm also involved in the video editing side of things within the office anyway, like on a Thursday, along with what I'm doing with the sort of logging with the press conference stuff. And then obviously logging the races, qualifying, sprint shootout, practice. That's pretty much the emphasis of my job, really. But answering your question, I'm sure there'll be a point. I'm hoping within maybe like the next 5 years or something like that. Depending on what gets offered to me or whatever comes around, if there's like a full-time position, let's say, that links well with my skill set, I would most certainly jump on it.
Mm.
And I follow, and given the connections I've got on LinkedIn as well, that are like advertising so many different roles, um, I'll just jump on it if I feel it's right for me.
Yeah.
Considering I'm in my late 20s now, it's coming to a point where I need to be sort of involved in the bigger stuff, if you know, let's say. Considering that you've got people who are like in their early 20s, or even teens for that matter. I mean, take, Scarlett, Zach, and Braden, who were involved in the F1 Kids stuff last year, because they were in Hungary for the Sky Sports stuff, weren't they? And I think they were in Biggin Hill for Singapore and
Yep.
Abu Dhabi when they were working with Chris McCarthy over there
Hmm. Yes, they were.
in Biggin Hill. Yeah. So hats off to them because I'm sure they've done very well to get to where they are now, and of course they're still doing stuff for Sky. And I think that's wonderful to see that children like them who are about to leave school and weighing up their options in terms of what they want to be doing for their careers or even education for that matter.
Hmm.
Um, to see them working within such a phenomenal environment at such a young age, I wouldn't even know where to begin if that was me in their position at their age to have that opportunity to even be offered it to begin with. You'd
Yeah.
just be like,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah, I think probably if that was the case 30 years ago, probably, you know, at that point, we didn't have we didn't have any social media. Sky was in its infancy days, to be honest with you, when it came to satellite TV. And then, you look at how things have evolved to where we are now in 2024, where everyone has the power of a pocket of a computer in their smartphone these days, where you're like literally folks for like the thing is on smartphones nowadays, it's email, social media, um, applications for anything, buying stuff online like Amazon, John Lewis, whatever. Back in my day, I think the when I got my first cell phone, which was aged 18, it was an old school Ericsson GA628. So this is after the Danny Glover days in Lethal Weapon, where he used to have a briefcase for a battery and one of those in-car phones, so like receivers on the top of it. And from what one of my friends told me, he said those batteries, if you were lucky, would last 90 minutes as long as you actually kept the thing on the battery rather than having to use it the whole time. So it's quite a way of how we've come. But yeah, I think it's just incredible that these younger people are getting these opportunities. And I think with what Formula One what Sky Sports have done with the F1 Kids side of things, I think is really really good because it opens it up to another newer generation. Very much like with what Formula E has done over the last 9 seasons, is opening up motorsport to the younger generations. Of course, yes, there is Drive to Survive, which at this point, season 6 is actually just about to get going. But I think by having a younger demographic now understanding the subtle nuances of Formula One, but then also feeder series like we see with F2, F3, Formula Four all across the globe. That there's I think that's really really good to see that there is a healthy fan base out there looking to give their input on what they think about what the teams are doing, what the drivers are doing, and so much else, isn't there?
yeah. I mean, it's great to see that a lot of championships like F2, F3, and F4 as well, all different F4s. Obviously, we've got Formula 4 UAE that's been going on at the moment, with a lot of young talent in there. They've got such huge fan bases. I mean, take Bianca Bustamante, for instance, who has had to come across from the Philippines to race in these championships, including F4 UAE. She's also competing under the McLaren guys in F1 Academy this season, which she's hoping to improve on her results from last year. And I think that's another thing, Alex, is more and more young girls being involved in the karting side of things, particularly those who are under budgeted, underfunded, come from a sort of middle class background, if that
Hmm.
makes sense.
Yeah.
To the fact that we've got these schemes going on at the moment, um, I can't remember what it's called. I think it's called Girls on Track or something like that. Or
Yeah.
I think there's something
Hmm.
Formula One related. But to see them be given an opportunity to drive these cars and even be involved in these schemes and understanding more about motorsport, in terms of how a kart works, what you need to do to be fast, understanding the engineering side of things, mechanicking, or even it's just like track marshalling. I mean, when I remember picking up my first job back in 2013 as a 17-year-old at my local kart track. Um, it wasn't fun, I will admit, but it gave me the experience to understand how karting works and understand, mechanicking in terms of adjusting brake pedals, accelerators, and adding fuel in, how to start an engine, for instance. It it gave me a little bit of an incentive in terms of what I wanted to do for my career. Perhaps not engineering side of things, but in terms of being involved as a commentator or being involved as a presenter. And that's sort of what led me on to sort of do my weekly radio show, Formula Tom, that I did for Brayford Radio and Siren when I was studying in Lincoln. And that was fascinating.
Mhm. Yeah, I think also radio is another, excuse me, another way in which it can be opened up to audiences, and it's not just the fact of listening on to, like, say, BBC Radio 5 Live, for instance, for their Formula One coverage. But then, of course, when people can literally just connect an app, have an app on their phone, play it through Bluetooth on their on their car radio, and if they've got like a 2 3 hour drive, then that's great, because then that gives them the opportunity to actually listen, digest it, and sort of, it can be a distraction from possible road rage on the roads these days, which is really, really good. I mean, radio, you had, you did commercial production at Lincolnshire FM. You former radio presenter at Siren Radio. You also did freelancing at Talk Leeds. What about radio sort of really drew you to it? Because being a radio presenter, doing production, it's in a way very, very similar to broadcast production, but it's the fact is that there's less of a worry of saying, okay, like some people say to me, you got a good face for radio, and I'm just like, shut up. It's there's a lot of similarities between a broadcast production for a radio station or a radio program, as there is in some respects to a full on audio and visual broadcast.
I mean, answering the first bit of your question about what draw me into radio is partly due to the fact that I was doing a media production course and it involved radio. So in my first year, in the second semester of my course, um, I was involved as an outside broadcaster. Little I wanted to do it because I was wanting to be as an in studio presenter, but outside
Mhm.
broadcasting was what I did, and I did a better job than I thought I would.
Yeah.
And that sort of what led me on to being more involved in the radio side of things. Took it as one of my two practical modules for my second year. Did very well in that. Definitely did a lot better than I did in TV for more reasons than one. Um, and whilst I was doing my radio stuff, I was doing my weekly radio series, Formula Tom, which I was doing like on a Tuesday evening every week for Brayford to begin with in 2016, and then in 17 and 18 I did it for Siren. And it was a weekly program which I did alongside a number of co-presenters, of which not only I was the host of the show, but also the producer for the program
Hmm.
as well. So I was sort of dealing with rotors, I was dealing with scripts, uh, running orders as well, all the bits and pieces you would expect a producer to do. And that was it. It was a privilege to be involved with Siren, um, and I even tried to get Lando Norris on, which I was only able to get like a pre-recorded interview with him, but it was still better than nothing. And Lando was competing in Formula 3 back in those days, and that was great. I managed to get him on. I managed also to get a pre-recording with Jordan King, Formula 2 race winner.
Hmm.
Um, so that was great because I remember discussing with him about the Delara F218, which is a thing of the past now because it's the F224 of which the F2 guys are racing in, most notably Andrea Kimi and Antonelli. But yeah, in terms of the stuff with the radio, that's really drawn me into it. It was great to get the opportunity to be on a proper live radio station, even if it wasn't the most popular in terms of um, listeners, because it was a community radio station,
Yeah.
so it was only sort of local within Lincoln, really. But to have the opportunity to talk about something that I truly love, um, was great. And I feel like I really want to get back involved in that again because I do feel like I have a voice for it.
Hmm.
It's just whether people actually see that in me. Um,
Yeah.
and that's why I've been trying to network with so many people saying, yeah, I've got this skill, but I've got these show reels that prove that I've got it. Um, but as you well know, within the industry of the field that we are chasing, there is not enough opportunities out there for so many people that are wanting to get involved in what it is that they were wanting to do.
Yeah, I completely agree with you because it's been a tough old slog for me. But I want to talk about considering of your role at Biggin Hill. Let's talk silly season. Now that the floodgates were quite literally blown wide open and the dam was overflowing with water, thanks to Lewis Hamilton's the announcement that really has surprised everybody. Lewis Hamilton switching to Maranello for 2025 after what will be a 12-year association with Mercedes and will partner Charles Leclerc. Carlos Sainz is out of a race seat at the end of this season. There's been a lot of talks about him. But then you look at how many other drivers that are out of contract at the end of this year. You take, for instance, Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly, who have still got 1 year left to run, respectively, on their contracts at Alpine. Then we've had Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri at McLaren, having their contracts extended to within the new regulations that we're going to see in 2026, when there's going to be more of a the electrical systems on the Formula One cars will have a bit more impact in terms of the horsepower application. Fernando Alonso has also been very, very cryptic, as he always has been, because he's still got his deal with Aston Martin up until the end of this year. Um, what have been your thoughts on what has transpired so far? Of course, Lewis now going to a new team again for the first time since everyone sort of wrote off his opportunity at Mercedes back in 2012 when he said, "Well, I'm leaving McLaren, I'm moving to Mercedes." Everyone went, "Well, you're crazy." I think, apart from a few people, myself included, where I said, "Well, if he gets the right team alongside him, then watch this space." And then he goes on to win his seventh world title at Istanbul Park in dramatic fashion, whereas Pirelli wet tyres had literally been burned down to the rubber underneath the blocks. I mean, what are your thoughts on how this has really just sort of changed the landscape of what we're going to see for 2025 and beyond in F1?
Well, it's certainly going to be stark contrast in what we are seeing this year because this year is an unchanged grid from what it was in Abu Dhabi.
Hmm.
So it's going to be quite different next year. Obviously, with Lewis going to Ferrari, which it's somewhere that he's dreamt of going to, I think, since he was a kid, in all honesty. I think when you're a kid growing up, if there's one team you would absolutely love to race for, it's
Hmm.
Ferrari. And I think Lewis is no exception to that. Uh, in terms of where Carlos Sainz is going to end up, it sounds like, judging by his own statement, that he's got a future sorted out. We don't know where it's going to be yet, but it sounds like he's remaining tight-lipped on where he's going just yet. Now, is that going to Mercedes? Is that going to Aston Martin? Is that going to Audi even? Because I
Yeah.
think Audi was one of the, or even Stake, joining Stake to begin with, and then obviously the team merging as Audi for 2026. He's remaining tight-lipped on it, and I don't blame him for that.
Hmm.
Because we've got so much of this year to look forward to, and so much can change in a short space of time. In terms of Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, it doesn't surprise me McLaren have kept um, both of them on, in all honesty, but I feel like Lando needs to really be in a position where he can actually fight for a world championship, let alone win races. But he's yet to win a race, as
Hmm.
Lando. And that's something that does need to change this year. Can he pick up that first win after over 5 years in being in Formula One? Because most drivers that go on to win a world championship will have won races in their first 5 years in Formula One. Um, so this is like a make or break year, I think, for McLaren. If they can get off to the best of starts, as opposed to last year and the year before, where they had arguably like the ninth fastest car. I think only Williams or whoever it was were slower than McLaren.
Hmm.
And by the time we got to Silverstone, all of a sudden the new upgrades that they brought the weekend before in Austria had clicked into gear, and McLaren was just a totally different team to where they were. But that's the kind of McLaren that needs to be there from race one, really, not from race 10 or whenever. If they're going to be probably not in the frame to win the world championship, because Red Bull at the moment, in terms of where they are with development, is just it's just too far fetched. They're miles in front in terms of what they've got on them. But I think if McLaren can be in the fray to beat Ferrari and Mercedes on their own days,
Yeah.
regularly enough, all of a sudden they can end up finishing second, third, or even worst case scenario, fourth. And I'm sure they'll happily take a fourth, but they'll want to get closer to Ferrari and Mercedes.
Yeah, considering the last time that McLaren actually won a world title was back in, funny enough, I think it was '08, the
Yeah,
year after Raikkonen took Ferrari's last world title by literally 1 or 2 points ahead of Fernando and Lewis, who were teammates. Then, of course, Spygate all happened that year when McLaren got docked all its manufacturers' points, and Lewis and Fernando could still battle for the driver's title. I mean, I'm hoping that the MCL 38, which has just been revealed, is going to be. I think Andrea Stella was quoted as saying that it is an evolution of last year's car, where, as you said, they were absolutely nowhere, and then halfway through the season, we see a completely different MC, car from last year, and then Oscar's fighting, and at one point he was actually leading a race as well, if I remember correctly. So there is a definite correlation into the upturn that McLaren have had since the midpoint of last year. So hopefully, yeah, that MCL 38 will come out of the blocks flying. I think also Alex Albon's another interesting person that we need to speak to about, because James Vowles has said he's locked in until 2025. So that then begs the question: what is going to happen if Checo doesn't perform in 2024 and then gets ousted? That's another question. But then, of course, you mentioned a certain Italian driver, Kimi Antonelli, who is now being fast tracked into Prima in Formula 2 this year with the new cars. An incredible talent. I remember watching him when he was running with Kart Republic, an absolute standout. No wonder Toto Wolff and the team at Mercedes decided to sign him up as a junior. I mean, you look at who else is in Mercedes junior program. Frederick Vesti from Denmark, who's also the test and reserve driver for Mercedes. I think if because I mean Albon's stock has risen significantly since he was released from Red Bull, went back to Williams. He's had a renaissance. He's been the team leader. He's made that car look a lot faster than what probably the team would have thought when the team went, oh, well, we've got a car that isn't really working as it should do. Hopefully, this year's car decides to do otherwise. But then you've also got Logan Sargent, from the USA. Williams have decided to keep him on because last year was his rookie year, and this sort of has a parallel with Mick Schumacher having a rookie year at Haas in a car that was not developed all the way through the season, and then we came into the first year of into 2022, and Mick had a tough time in a car that predominantly has takes a lot of the parts from Ferrari, and now is going to be running with Alpine in the World Endurance Championship this year, which is going to be another new audience for him to be exposed to in the world of sports cars. But I think Albon is quite an interest. He could be the final piece of the puzzle that puts everything together for what we might see in the forthcoming drivers' market when it either comes to 2025 or whether we go to 2026 and Albon gets the call up from Red Bull again. I mean, that's what there's a lot of hype about that at the moment.
I mean, who would not want to have Alex Albon in their team right now, given how well he's been at Williams in the last couple of years? I think he was sort of thrown in the deep end at Red Bull. I mean, I never thought he was ready to be in a Red Bull when he was
Yeah.
given the opportunity to do so. And I feel like Red Bull had somewhat disintegrated the careers of Kvyat, Gasly, and Albon,
Mm.
never giving them enough time. Um, and for a top team like Red Bull, if they gave Kvyat 2 whole seasons and then dropped him, I would understand that more. And I would apply the same thing with Gasly and Albon. Gasly was only given 12 races, and Albon was given, well, you could say 1.5 seasons, but the whole season which Albon had with Red Bull didn't begin until July of 2020. So yeah, it's a weird one with Red Bull, but the fact that Perez has been their best shot since Ricardo had left tells you everything about them. And there's all this sort of link going on about Perez's future within Red Bull, which I think that's really harsh if I'm honest with you, because like I say, Perez has been by far the standout driver compared to all of the predecessors
Mm.
of of that Red Bull second seat alongside Max. But in terms of where Albon could potentially end up, it wouldn't surprise me if he stays at Williams, because I think Williams need him right now. If they keep hold of I think if Albon was to go, I think Williams have got to do what they can to keep hold of Sargent, because I don't think they'll want to go into 2025 with 2 completely new drivers within that team. Whether it's rookies or
Mm.
drivers that have never raced for Williams before, therefore stepping into an environment that's totally unfamiliar. I mean, James Fowles has essentially got a decision to make, team
Yeah.
principal of Williams. I mean, I do back James to do a superb job with what he's got over at Williams. But can Williams make that leap forward from where they were last year? I mean, Albon did very well to get the results they've got, but they can't keep doing that forever. They need to get right in the sort of mix in the midfield a lot more often.
Mm.
Even like finishing fifth or sixth in a few of the races, or even having a sniff of the top teams. Because if you look at last year and how often those top 10 places in the points were being monopolised, you look at Red Bull, you look at Mercedes, you look at
Yeah.
Ferrari, you look at McLaren, and you look at sort of Aston Martin stroke Alpine. That's 12 cars right there.
Mm.
And it felt to me like most occasions those points were being sort of taken up by those 6 teams that I've mentioned, and then the other 4 teams are just sort of saying, well, if we get ninth or 10th, it's usually like a good result. But they want to be fighting for the bigger points really than just fighting for 2 or 1 point. So we'll have to wait and see this year, particularly the number of races we've got this year. I mean, it's 24 races, which is the most Formula One has ever done, and we've got 6 sprints.
Oh
I mean,
yes.
I remember you saying last year, Alex, in terms of the number of races that Formula One was looking to do, and you weren't very fond on the idea of the number of races they were doing and the how much of a strenuous task it's going to be for those on the logistics side of things, drivers, team personnel, all the sponsors involved in it, DHL, for instance. You name it all, Alex. I mean, you've been around in your life longer than I have. You'll know in terms of what it's like to actually work within a paddock of some degree.
Yeah. It's never. Yeah, I mean 2024 race weekends. I like the fact that there has been a little bit of a a constructive change to how they're going to run the sprint weekends, which is going to be that they'll have Friday practice as usual, and then on sprint weekend I think it's sprint qualifying, sprint race, and then they go. I think isn't it going to be something like they're going to do qualifying for the race itself separate as well, so there's no sort of like, if I remember correctly, when the sprint weekends happened last year, everyone was in parc fermé conditions after Friday through practice, which meant that you had to do as best a compromise setup as you could, and this was all the teams, and reference the sprint and then also the race as well, which I felt was a bit. I was a bit on the fence about, and then I looked at it and I went, well, yeah, okay, the sprint is conducive because it points towards the championship, but then you really want these teams to be competing at the highest level possible within the scope of the regulations. Okay, yes, cost cutting and the cost cap and everything like that. I understand, which is going to be happening anyway at some point in Formula One's future. And now that it has happened, we're in, I think, the second season of that. I think it'd be more conducive to the racing to give the teams the opportunity to make the sprint race day and the qualifying, the main race day, sort of a separate entity within that weekend, which I think is, in some respects, I do actually applaud the fact that F1 has decided to do something constructive and change the format in order to make it a lot more exciting, I think, in general. But yeah, like you say, 24 race weekends. I mean, especially when you're going to be at Biggin Hill, sometimes, depending on the time zone, you're going to be there from like early evening until like late morning. In some cases, I mean, I hate to think what the schedule was for you for the Las Vegas Grand Prix late last year, considering the fact it was run on a Saturday as opposed to a traditional Sunday because of the time zone differential. And then, of course, they had all the FOM had all the hoo ha. Liberty had all the hoo ha with the the problems reference sorting out all the grandstands, the paddock area around Las Vegas, and Las Vegas is one of the is a city that never sleeps, and we all know that through the amount of events that go on there, such as MMA, so UFC, primetime boxing, and then of course Formula One comes into the mix, and then I hate to think what your shift patterns are like when you go to Biggin Hill at sometimes.
It's not as strenuous as you might think, Alex,
Mm,
because I'm with Formula One going to Vegas. There's no F2 or F3, which
right.
I'm logging because there's that involved. But with being Las Vegas, I have to be sort of up and arrive about half an hour before uh, the first session begins. So I think it was like 2 a.m. or something like that when uh, FP1 had begun for Vegas.
Yeah.
So you can imagine, given that the buses are not running at that time, even in London, or there may well be, but sometimes it may be like one every hour because it's like a night bus, because night buses don't happen too often. Um, but I do sometimes obviously get lifts from my colleagues, or
Hmm.
worst case scenario, get an Uber over to Biggin Hill. Um, but one particular shift I do remember that's not Las Vegas, it's Australia, because F2 and F3 raced in Australia for the first time.
Yeah.
And I think on the Sunday, or for the Sunday, I was in the building, arriving at something like 10:30 in the evening on the Saturday night, and then working all the way through to Sunday morning and not finishing until like, 8:30 or something ridiculous like that. So it does feel unusual, but the good thing about it is you're not alone.
Hmm.
When you're in that building, there's plenty of people who you know there. I mean, I know a lot of people who work there because I see them all the time on the premises. Not just those from the digital media department, but all those working within the production department. The commentators is there as well. You know, and even the dinner ladies. Or even the dinner people working within the canteen upstairs. I see them very often. Sometimes I can go up there to like grab a drink or something, and just sort of going in and say, hi, how are you, that type of thing. I think that's one thing, is like harnessing the relationships within everyone within Formula One and not just within the department that you're working in. I think that's the number one thing when a new recruit. But given I've been working there for 2 years now, I'd like to think that most of everyone has seen my face of some degree, but perhaps maybe not like know me as much as others do.
Brilliant. Well, Tom, that's thank you so much for jumping on board for Commentators Corner, episode 58. Folks, if you want to give Tom a follow, I've linked his social media links in the descriptions, both on the video version here on YouTube, but also on Downforce Radio, which this show is being broadcasted on. Jake Sanson, I need to give you a kick up the backside because it's meant to be part of the regular programming, and that hasn't quite happened yet. He'll get round to it when he normally does, as usual. But then, of course, we're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music. Tom, thank you so much for your time. And Enjoy what's going to be a very, very busy F1 2024 season for you, buddy. Thanks for coming on.
No problem. Thank you, Alex, for the time that you've given to me.
So there you go. That's it for episode 58. If in doubt, flat out, we'll see you next time for episode 59 because we're definitely racking up the episodes here on Commentator's Corner. Goodbye.